Greetings, everyone. Sorry about that. I would like to apologize for that. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the third SASL seminar. My name is Londega Ntshangase. I'm the sign language interpreter at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, based on the Howard campus. I will be your program director for the seminar, along with my colleague, Ms. Tsolofelo Sekhatwi. I hope you have enjoyed the program thus far. As you join the session, today I will kindly like all participants to take note of the house rules currently being shared on screen, which has been emailed to all registered participants as well. Our technical team will be available in the chat area to assist whenever possible. You may also use WhatsApp to contact my colleague, Ms. Londiwe Mdaba, on 073-850-9623. She will assist via mobile as well. Thank you so much for that. Without any further ado, let me take this opportunity and call upon the chair for this year's seminar, Ms. Nokuthula Khumalo, to provide a recap of the proceedings from day one. Nokuthula Khumalo, over to you. I would like to apologize for that. It seems like Ms. Nokuthula Khumalo is having technical issues. Can we please bear with her for a few minutes? Thank you.
Attendees, it seems like Nokuthula's system has kicked her out. She's just rejoining. Just give her a minute.
It seems like we are, Ms. Nokuthula Khumalo is experiencing some internet issues. I would like to continue with the program. We will have Nokuthula after she has sorted out the problem with the connection.
Londeka, it's Marty.
Yes,
Can we
Marty.
just check on the sign language interpreters visibility? Because it seems like in the chat, people are saying that they're not seeing the interpreter.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I wasn't aware. Sorry for that. I missed. Nokuthula is the one who is responsible to pin the interpreter. We are trying to sort out the issue. It will be sorted as soon as possible. Really sorry for that.
Can I have the sign language interpreter open up their screen, please, so I can see if I can pin them? The video. I'm just going to have to exit and rejoin so that the host rights can be passed over to me. I do apologize for this, people, but we are experiencing a technical challenge right now. So just give me about 2 more minutes and I should have this sorted out. I'm going to leave and rejoin.
Dr. Subia, can you take your screen down, and can I have the sign language interpreter's screen up? I only see one at the moment. Okay, so thanks for that, Dr. Subia. I'm going to pop that for everyone. So let me know if that pops up. Can everybody see the sign language interpreter now?
Yes.
And just let me know in the chat. And Londeka, I'm not sure who was sharing next, or who's next to go on the item on the program.
The next present is gonna be Mrs. Ingrid Parkin. I would like to apologize for that once again. I would like to introduce our first presenter, Mrs. Ingrid Parkin. She is the principal at the St. Vincent School for the Deaf. She is a former director of deaf education at DEFSA and a former deputy principal at Fulton School for the Deaf. Mrs. Ingrid Parkin, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Can the host pin me? All right, fantastic. Okay, right, wonderful. I'm being pinned. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, and a big thank you to KwaZulu-Natal for hosting the seminar and also asking me to do a presentation. I'm not going to present the slide online. I would like to continue. Why? Because I would like the people to see me using sign language, and my interpreter, Johnny Mai, will be doing my voiceover. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience years ago when I left school. I wasn't sure what am I going to do with my life, etc. And then I decided to become a teacher because I felt that I can be a good teacher So I went to a university. My apologies, now I'm jumping. I went to the Johannesburg College of Education, and I want to access it, and they unfortunately said, no, deaf people cannot teach. They refused me access to the college. So I was like 2 years hanging around, not sure what to do. Then I finally got into Wits University. And from 1993 till 1996, and then also 1999 until 2000. And I've experienced the university environment for 6 years. And this links to my topic today. Deaf people in basic education, how do they transition into higher education? And that is the topic that was given for me to talk about. What issues is there? What challenges do we face? What solutions could there possibly be? And it's not an easy topic. That transition from school to university for a deaf learner is not easy. I can really say in the 6 years at the university, I really enjoyed myself tremendously. I really enjoyed the studying part, but more the social part, if I could say, partying and everything like that, for those who know me. But yes, I had an interpreter full-time with me for that 6 years. The first challenge that I faced was the funding for the interpreter, because you need to pay the interpreter for their services, and I myself had to go and look for funding myself, and I managed to get funding. Then the second challenge I experienced, and that's a challenge that most deaf people still face, is that the interpreters that are available on a higher education level at university, there's a lot of challenges coming with it, the terminology, the concept, the theory, the research part. Those are challenges that the interpreters should be skilled in voicing and signing. For example, if a deaf person wants to ask a question, they would speak to the lecturer. The interpreter wouldn't use the correct terminology when voicing. Be it geography, history, philosophy, etc., English, Shakespeare, that was difficult for the interpreters to be skilled in. At that time when I studied, I solved this issue by asking the interpreter to use total communication. And then I tried to lip read and follow sign language. Now, coming to school pupils, there are a lot of challenges in the basic education environment. It's very protected. They get a lot of teacher support, a lot of extra lessons, a lot of notes are prepared for them. And for some of them, the curriculum would have various skills that they need to develop, like research skills, making a project, getting information, put it down in a summary, and using various other resources. When you enter the university, it's only entirely up to you to do your own research, to use various resources, make your own projects, write your own essays, and you're really on your own most of the time. And you should know how to use the library, how to use the internet to obtain the information for your projects. Now, at school, they do not practice that part much. It's more of a teacher preparing the work for you, giving you the notes. Now, on a school level, from a school level to a university level, that both those environments are completely different. When you go from school to university, all of the requirements and methods are different. The expectations are different. And it's significantly different. When you go from school to university, you will be overwhelmed. It is difficult, and it can cause that deaf learner, when they enter the university, not to be prepared, to drop out, to lose confidence, and so forth. Those are some of the challenges. Then also at the university, most of the assignments that you are doing, or the homework in inverted commas, is written essay formats. Now on school, you're not doing that. It's different. It is multiple choice, one word answers, one center answers. But in university, it's different. And those are the challenges they have to face. Now, I'll give you the solutions later for that. Another challenge, and this is really a challenge that starts at school level, is the sign language part. Coming to the sign language, the level of development towards or be able to sign sciences, concepts, various terminology in the curriculum. For example, when you come to mathematics, understanding the concept in sign language, scientific concepts. Now, it starts in a school level, but then there are signs for certain terminologies or level of concepts that does not exist, that you don't seem to have a common sign for all over. And people get stuck, and the interpreters get stuck on those things. Now, on school level, the challenges are the same. For example, when you go to grade 1, 2, 3, grade 4, 5, the signing from grade 1 develops. But when you reach grade 7, 8, and 9, the mathematic concepts, the natural sciences concept, the social sciences concept become more difficult. English gets introduced, Shakespeare gets introduced on the FET level, and that's EGD, computers. Those concepts are more abstract, and they will not have the appropriate science for it. So maybe the school will develop their own internal science for those terminologies. And that happens in other schools, but it's not common. And there's no terminology or common terminology for those signs. So when a deaf person go to university, the interpreter can use those signs, but they don't have access to those signs. So it's higher concepts, and where do the interpreter get the concepts from? So that is still a challenge in a school level, and I can imagine still a challenge on university level. Another challenge that I experience, and it's also on a school level and it translates to the university level, is the true development of a bilingual approach. The deaf community in the school, when we do theory and we lobby for the bilingual approach in education for deaf learners, the deaf learners' outcome expectation is sign language strong, but English and reading, writing must be strong as well. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is you need to develop both languages equally strong. So you can switch easily between sign language and English, from reading English and converting it into sign language, or reading English or translating it and linking it into sign language from the interpreter when you watch the interpreter. So on a school level, we face those challenges as well in both languages, the development of sign language and the bridging between English and sign language. The challenges in that aspect is a different topic entirely on its own, but for a learner to go to university, if they haven't developed English reading and writing strongly in comparison to sign language, when a lecturer speaks and they watch the interpreter, and when they do their homework, they cannot link what they've seen to the written word. And that is a big challenge for all of the deaf people. I'll give you one example. Geography. And especially, it was a specialty subject of mine in which I did my master as well. You know, on a river, you have a bank next to the river to prevent the water from going over onto the land. Now, the river also have next to it a hill or a bank. There's various things or various concepts like a levee, a dike, a bank, or a border. So now, looking at those words, you need to link those concepts with the signing and from the sign language into English. Now, those challenges my school tried to address. So when a deaf learner goes into university, you go from school to university and the bridge between the two is very weak. There are various challenges: reading, writing, availability of interpreters. And then when it comes to availability of interpreters, it's challenging because let's say they want to study different fields. And now the interpreters that are available, there's only one or two available at university. And a deaf person will say, oh, you've got an interpreter in this field, but I want to study something else. I want to study engineering. I want to study teaching. I want to study accounting, all those things. And there's only one interpreter available at university. The university will say, we have an interpreter, but only in the education faculty. But there's a multiple choice for the person to study. So those are some of the challenges you face. The next part of my presentation I'll do in two sections. I do realize it will be and might be controversial in some ways. The first part is I've had deliberations about popular solutions out there where people talk in the community about, but versus reality in South Africa, I'm not sure that is a solution, or I'm not confident in it. That's the one part I'm going to talk about. The other part I'm going to highlight is solutions for more the reality of what we face in South Africa now versus university expectations, academic expectations, and also getting quicker access to university. Now, to enable a majority of choices to study, a deaf person can then choose any field to study. But I now choose this specific faculty because there's an interpreter available, but it's not their first choice. So let me talk about the popular solutions first. Most universities, the Department of Education would then give a budget for interpreters. But now universities should do the same. they should develop sign language interpreting programs where they can train these interpreters for university level of interpreting. Universities and schools, we both should work together more so that the university can start a university readiness program with the schools, so that university can highlight the expectations and we can start training the learners on school level. So sort of a bridging course. The next point that is also popular, and I know this has been a challenge for many years. There's a lot of talk about it, but nothing really happens. Hopefully it will happen. The basic education departments and the schools must work together to create a database for academic science to enhance the sign language for university level. I know that sign language is out there and it's out in the various schools and we have those resources, but there's no common database. We haven't seen such a thing yet. Let me give you an example, a practical example. I'm a maths teacher and she teaches maths for grade 12, 11, 8 and 9. And as a deaf maths teacher, I've been teaching maths for many years. And the mathematics sign language is there, the mathematic concepts is there, and wow, it's got for pi and times tables and etc. The sign language is developed, the sign language is exceptionally well. We've got that resource. We should use it. And I'm sure the other schools also have it, and we have it for all subjects. But we need to create one database for all the schools. I must say, and truly, when it comes to true bilingual practice for deaf learners, the World Federation for the Deaf Language Policy indicates about true bilingualism is about reading and writing and sign language that are equally important and should develop equally. There's a lot of talk that we need schools to educate and develop a strong English reading and writing and sign language. Yes, sign language helps you to enhance your understanding of English on school level. Now, the possibility there could be that the universities can allow the deaf students for their assignments and for their projects to be done in sign language. That is what they want to allow in future. But then you need lecturers to understand sign language exceptionally well. So there's a lot of popular decisions, and that can be lobbied more on a university level. But let me get to my second part. Realistic solutions. We have plenty of universities in the country, but the availability of interpreters is very few. In Johannesburg, Western Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Free State, but the deaf access to them are very few and far apart and also expensive. Now I've chat with my colleagues, with people all over the world, and also visited some universities abroad. And one solution I've picked up, because they also have a problem with available interpreters. And we need to look at other solutions. Now, the South African universities should actually consider to bring voice-to-text software. Now, I've asked this, and I've asked Pretoria University if they have such a technology available, so that the deaf students themselves, when they go to university and they sat in a lecture, they have their devices there. The lecturer can do their lecture. The deaf student can then read the subtitles. And I'm not talking about WhatsApp voice to text and Apple's voice to text. There's a specific advanced software that you have voice to text technology that universities can purchase to have a deaf person independently read the subtitles and make their own notes. If a deaf person wants to answer a question, they can type it and the lecturer can then read it on their device. If the education department, higher education department bring the software, then the deaf students can access it in universities independently. But that is provided if they've got a strong reading skill. But if you go to university, you should have a good capacity for English and reading and writing. A few years ago, I've developed a relationship with the University of Witwatersrand to bring in technology, but somehow the costs, there was a once-off funding, but the cost had some implication where the deaf person then could read the subtitles on their devices anywhere at the university. Yes, they have interpreters for support and tutoring, etc. I know that there's a lot of activism for getting full sign language at university, and I agree, but we should also have enough faith in the deaf student to access a wide spectrum of language, for example, English, when they enter the university. Because when you're at the university level, a deaf student can then be less reliable on the interpreter. Yes, you can have your interpreter there, but they can be more independent on that level. So yes, I've seen this technology in practice, and I must say it's amazing. If we can actually import this technology at our higher institutions, you can communicate directly with your lecturers without an interpreter. You can type and speak to each other, and there is communication. Then the deaf person is not limited to study certain degrees or courses where interpreters are available. They will then have a multi-access channel to various other subject fields to study. And I think it's a must. A deaf person can then go into the academic field, which is very broad, and go into their interests, the same and equally the same as a hearing student. If we bring such technology in, we will give the deaf people access, and it is available now while we then train more interpreters and get more interpreters available for the future. If the deaf person accesses the university now and they social and interact on a university level, they mustn't feel they are liable on somebody else. They will have the technology and it will be amazing. You know, I have strong faith in my deaf students so they can integrate in the university level quite well. We have a few students from St. Vincent School at the universities in the Free State, University of Johannesburg, and they really enjoy their social life and they've integrated well. Yes, they do have challenges because of the availability of interpreters. And that's why I've approached the university to say, we need to bring this technology in. What is more important is for everyone to collaborate more, the universities and the schools. We need to strengthen the schools as well. There's low expectations. The teacher methods are limited. Translating between English and sign language the whole time. Not just one school, all the schools. There's a lot of schools that do well, but they all need to work together now. We need to work together, and I believe we can make it happen for the deaf students. I want to say thank you, colleagues. I think I've actually went over my time. I'm not done. Yes, I did. A minute over my time. My apologies. I want to say thank you for listening to me, and thank you for patiently listening to me. And I'm quite eager to hear if the universities will be eager to get this technology for the future deaf students in the meantime. Thank you. Love you all.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, for that wonderful presentation. It was really, we really enjoyed listening to you. Moving to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Mrs. Martin Miranda. She is the head of the Center for Universal Access and Disability Support at the University of the Free State. She is also a chairperson of the Higher Education Disability Services Association, also known as HEDSA. Martin Miranda, over to you.
Wonderful to share the space with you, seeing some former colleagues and fellow sign language interpreters and deaf people, and it's really lovely to see you. Can I just check whether I am audible and whether you can see me? Londeka, if you can.
You are audible.
Okay, thank you so much. So I was told I can just introduce myself by putting on or just showing my face for a little while. So I'm going to share my presentation. So if you can just give me a minute or a second or two. Okay, may I please just ask if my screen is visible?
Yes, Marty, it is.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so for now, I am talking, I just want to be clear that obviously I wear my hat as a sign language interpreter as well, but because I was requested to specifically talk about a HEDSA's perspective, and I'll give you some background of what HEDSA does so that you just know from which perspective I am coming with the presentation.
So sorry, Marty, for interrupting you. The interpreter is not visible.
Okay, so is there something that I must do on my side?
Let us sort out that issue.
Okay, I'll just pause.
Thank you, Marty. You can continue.
Okay, thank you, Londeka. So I have been eagerly listening to all the presentations that were made already, and I have made notes of, thinking about the institution where I'm at, of what we can do to improve our services to our deaf students already. Now, just to explain to you what HEDSA's role is. So we as disability units who are members of HEDSA work together, and obviously look then at how deaf students are provided equal access to our institutions of higher and technical vocational education and training. So although we serve different students with disabilities, we also serve deaf students who make use of sign language specifically. And I will clarify a bit later what the role or the difference is between the interpreter services that we render and then also the support to our deaf students. So what we also do is we have mutual cooperation between institutions to meet the deaf students' needs. So we look at the facilitation of optimal resource utilization. We try to redress imbalances and facilitate equity, access, quality, governance, and financial sustainability between all the institutions. And we look at sharing best practices between disability units where services exist. And here I specifically want to say, as Ingrid indicated now, that not at all the universities we have sign language interpreter services. It's just at a few institutions. But then there are institutions, and more recently, I'm thinking of TVET colleges that have started with sign language interpreter services and then don't know where to start. And then HETSA also then try to assist these disability units and guide them as to, how they can start with the service for deaf students. So from a HETSA perspective, in 2015, we've identified the need to actually develop a guideline to assist institutions with the employment of sign language interpreters, because it was quite problematic at the time. It was between UCT, Free State, and WITS, and KwaZulu-Natal, that we sort of started having this conversation and developed a guideline. So it was in a very draft format. And then in 2017, we had a relook at it, and it's currently shared between the disability units. So I just want to share with you what is included in the guidelines at the moment. And obviously we are looking at updating it because it's not cast in stone, seeing that our environment has changed a lot. We, as institutions, we're moving from face-to-face environment to a more blended approach now, where we have had the experience with the online environment. So if I can just share what's in the guidelines at the moment. So firstly, we explain the purpose of the guidelines. Is where we try to assist tertiary institutions. We explain the deaf student versus the sign language interpreter, backgrounds in terms of deaf students' background coming from basic education, the resources available at schools, and the transitioning that Ingrid also referred to is mentioned there. And then also the SASL, the background in terms of where sign language is, where the interpreting profession comes from, where it started, where it is now, so that one takes that in consideration, because we don't have the professional qualified interpreters that people tend to ask for, because as we know, the availability of sign language interpreters are problematic. So it's also taking note of available resources at different institutions. And here I want to mention an example where you'll find one university that has the privilege of having a disability unit, a department that runs with interpreter services separately from the disability unit, and a course in language practice, including sign language, versus another institution that has no interpreter services because there's only one medium used in the education, and a disability unit, and no language practice course, for example. Okay, so that has to be taken into account as well, and it depends on the resources that's available at universities, how they would coordinate the support to the deaf student and then employment of sign language interpreters. So then we also provide the background on the educational interpreting in South Africa, the challenge of deaf school leavers, the low enrollment numbers of deaf learners, and the challenges with the appointment of SASLs as well. And we provide current situations at institutions where the sign language interpreter services are rendered. We provide the deaf versus SASL ratio to get an understanding of the unavailability actually. So the growing need for trained and professional sign language interpreters are mentioned, and also the lack of qualified and available SASLs as well. So then we provide case studies of universities who have the service, and we provide, in terms of how the language policy of the university includes sign language or not. Does the disability unit support deaf students in A, B, and C, and then provide the interpreter service in a certain manner? Is it coordinated by a specific person, or is it done by the disability unit, etc.? So there's different case studies in the guideline. Then we also share general best practice in terms of the recruitment process. When you start looking for sign language interpreters, where do you go? Where do you start with recruitment? And then also the interview process, the importance of having deaf people and even deaf students as part of the process of the interviews and the selection process when you look into the employment of SASLs. And then with the appointment of the SASL, there's obviously a job description. So we give examples of a job description and the minimum requirements for a junior sign language interpreter, then also an advanced sign language interpreter. And there's suggested in how to increase the availability of sign language interpreters. And we also share, how one should treat ad hoc and freelance sign language interpreter appointments, because at one university you will find that they appoint sign language interpreters permanently. At other universities they won't appoint, but rather have them on contract basis and then pay per hour, for example. Then also suggested an internship for SASLs, and this is where Asanda, with her keynote address yesterday, also alluded to how important it is to have mentors for interpreters. So to have internships and how to deal with that, and how to have a mentor relationship with interpreters. How do you start with a brand new sign language interpreter that just finished with a language practice course, and to shadow with other interpreters in the lecture halls, and then to learn and then mentor and provide them the opportunity to learn at the workplace as well. And then we also suggest the salary framework, and this was obviously consulted with our organizations like DEFSA, the hourly rates, and also if you appoint permanently, what kind of salary do you look at for a junior, advanced, etc. And then also a complaints procedure of, if a deaf student says, I'm not happy with the interpreter service, how is it dealt with? And then usually the first thing that would happen, and it comes so beautifully in with Asanda's comment made yesterday, that hearing people taking for granted the human right of a deaf person to have access to a sign language interpreter, and maybe a preferred sign language interpreter, because it's all about wanting to succeed with their academic journey. And what usually happens, if people within the disability unit, for example, might not be aware of how important it is to have a sign language interpreter present in a discussion besides the interpreter that's interpreting in class if a complaint is lodged, because it won't help to include the interpreter that's actually interpreting in class for the deaf student to interpret for the student when you're having a a discussion on the complaint the deaf student is lodging. So the importance of having that difference understood, but also not to listen to hearing people necessarily when it is said, but the deaf student A, B, and C, that is why the interpreting is happening in such a fashion. But rather to get the deaf person's perspective as well and have a conversation with an independent sign language interpreter present. And then also quality control. How do we do quality control of sign language interpreters at our institution? The mentoring also part of that, but also to share between sign language interpreters at the institution, so that they also learn from each other. It's sort of also then gauging whether one could move from a junior position to a more advanced level, because there's difference in payments. Okay. And then we also clarify the role of educational SASLs, where it specifically includes terminology development, and such a big need. And I really think that this is something that our institutions can work more on, and actually share with those that do have the services and do have terminology developed, that and obviously the important part there is to have it agreed with the deaf community as well. So to have that shared between institutions I think will make a huge difference, and the struggle for sign language interpreters so much better. And then we also have the SATI code, let me just say it's the South African Translators Institute's Code of Ethics included in the guideline as well, which was also adapted for sign language interpreters specifically. And then we have a section where we're specifically talking about the coordination of the service. So with one university, you will have interpreter services, and then the coordination will happen from there, where deaf students' timetables will be shared and interpreters will be booked for their classes. Or you will have a disability unit contact person for deaf students that will coordinate the interpreter schedules according to the deaf student schedules or class timetables. So depending on the resources available at the institution, how that should be done. And I think it's important, especially, and I must say I was quite amazed with the presentation done yesterday of UKZN's interpreters. It was really beautiful, by the way. I thought that, there's so many different campuses, and yes, then per campus, you might want to coordinate so that, because interpreters also need breaks, they can't interpret 3 hours at a time and so forth. So it's sort of to create a fair distribution of hours between sign language interpreters and so forth. So it's important that you have a sort of one person that coordinates the service as well. And then the importance of training of SASL, where sign language interpreters should be allowed to interpret outside the institution as well to develop their skills, but that their first priority would be the deaf student, depending on the appointment they are in, whether it's permanent or contract or ad hoc and so forth. So that's the guidelines and what that includes. And like I said, it's not cast in stone, and obviously I made my notes as well, so we will definitely update again and again and again. But what I would like to share with you is how we've, as disability units, identified, especially now during the pandemic, and even a little bit before pandemic, how the needs of deaf students have changed as well. Now, it can be for different reasons, but there are options for deaf students to do oral tests meaning, you know, they will be signing their answers, and it will be video recorded. And then there's also an option where a deaf student would be writing their answers, and then it will be translated into English by an interpreter as well. Okay, so that happens. It depends the module, it depends which course it is, so it differs for each deaf student. Something that came in more recently was the real-time captioning, and that is specifically something that is a choice of a deaf student. A deaf student would like to have real-time captioning, maybe because he's not happy with the sign language interpreter service, or because it's an option and he prefers to read the material in English, and it assists with note-taking. So depending on the deaf student's need, the disability unit will then provide the service, or that's the idea. Then with the online environment towards the blended learning approach, the role of the sign language interpreter, you know, sort of started changing, and you know, because there were a lot of struggles with the pandemic starting, where lecturers would have pre-recorded videos of their lectures, and then it be uploaded on the learning platform. And then, oops, I have a deaf student in my class, and he didn't get the info. Then the video is sent to the interpreter service or the disability unit, and then we assist with closed captionings and use software to do that, or the sign language interpreter actually gets involved in assisting with subtitling as well. And sign language interpreters are also doing video recordings when we do receive the lectures information up front before it's actually uploaded for other students to see. It's sent to interpreter services or the disability unit, and then the sign language interpreters do the recording, and both those recordings are then shared with the deaf student. Then there's also podcasts, a lot of podcasts now with the online environment as well, and how transcriptions of podcasts are so important then for deaf students as well, because otherwise podcast is inaccessible. Then the knowledge of the online platforms for sign language interpreters have become more important, because you will have one-on-one tutor sessions with a deaf student with a tutor, and then a sign language interpreter is needed, and how they function there. And yesterday's video was beautiful, how it was showed between the interpreter and the deaf student communicating over WhatsApp, but include a tutor in the process. How do you do that? And then also lecturer consultations. It happens online, and now you need an interpreter, and it depends the platform that is used. With one institution, they only allow MS Teams and not Zoom because of licensing, etc. And then how do you then accommodate the deaf student on that particular platform? And then a very specific concept, which is it's fairly, but it's been driven by DHET. It's in 2018, the strategic policy framework on disability for the post-school and education, or no, the post-school education and training sector was approved, and it includes very specifically that universal access and universal design in learning must be implemented as an approach at our institutions. Okay, so, and this says basically that all students, not just deaf students, all students must be provided flexibility in their learning material, in their access to material, access to systems, So you can apply it everywhere. And that says that all the above that I've mentioned should be okay. So if the deaf student says, I want real-time captioning because it's my preferred option, then the institution should be able to provide that. And no, I want a sign language interpreter, then the institution should provide that. Or for this module, I would prefer real-time captioning, but for this module, I would like to have a sign language interpreter, and then an institution should be able to provide that. So then it brings me to the evolving role of SASLs and how we should see that. And I think Asanda also very importantly mentioned yesterday of how important it is that sign language interpreters should be fluent in both their target languages. Or if it's 3, depending on the institution and what its language policy says, but that you will have to be fluent in, say, English and South African Sign Language if you need to do the oral tests and exams and the transcribing of tests and exams, for example. And with real-time captioning, it's always a problem to find somebody to actually do real-time captioning, but it is a possibility for sign language interpreters to provide that service if the sign language interpreter is not needed elsewhere. That, you know, you need to maybe look at your typing skills and your computer literacy skills in that regard. And I mean, I'm not saying that all sign language interpreters must now become real-time captioners, but it's an option. Then with the online and the blended learning approach, the subtitling, the closed captioning for pre-recorded videos, you know, you need to know the software and Ingrid's input regarding the voice-to-text software as well. It might be useful for sign language interpreters to know how that works as well. And the specific software for subtitling so that you can assist with that if your services are not needed as a sign language interpreter, that you can still provide this kind of service. Your knowledge in terms of video equipment, how to use it so that whatever you are recording is done professionally, taking into consideration your code of ethics within the online environment as well, your background, etc. The transcribing of material as well, from especially with you know, if you talk about podcasts, the tests and exams as well. You can transcribe documents if you need to as well. And then something that definitely came up is that interpreters actually now have the option to prepare properly. That is now if lecturers are playing with the disability unit and cooperate in terms of providing their material up front, so that interpreters have time to prepare and then make a video recording of the lecture in sign language. And then obviously you need to know the online platforms. If you need to pin yours or let your deaf student pin yourself, you need to be able to guide the deaf student, etc. So you need to be fluent in knowing what exactly it is you need to do on an online platform to accommodate your deaf student. And then this code of ethics within the online environment as well, as I mentioned before. And then with the universal access and universal design approach, taking note that this is the approach that institutions will be following. It's happening slowly, but it's happening. And it will be expected that more options are available to deaf students to receive their material, whether it's in sign language or in documents, in transcriptions, in subtitles. Because as much as we think subtitles are for hard of hearing and deaf people, it's also there for learners with learning difficulties. Some people prefer to read information instead of listening to information. So that is why the options, the flexibility is important. So within sign language interpreter skill as language practitioners, one should look into, your editing, translations, and interpreting, obviously, and be fluent with all of that. And noting that not all our sign language interpreters have had access to proper qualifications and the necessary training that we're talking about. So, colleagues, that is all from me. And I would like to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information. And I hope it was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marty, for that wonderful presentation. We are now moving to our next presenter, Mr. Gavin Oppahosa. He is the sign language interpreter with 10 years of South African sign language interpreting in tertiary education institutions. Currently, he is employed as a sign language interpreter at the National Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. Mr. Gavin, over to you.
Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, mentors, esteemed guests. Thank you very much for that introduction. Wow, to follow some of your mentors and esteemed colleagues now makes one a little bit nervous. I will be sharing my screen and a bit of a presentation. The presentation that I'm doing today is just my experience working in various tertiary education institutions. Different universities, some of them are private, most of them are public institutions. And the practices which I have observed and been part of within the universities, I am neither condoning or dispelling or casting any sort of aspersions. I see we can't see the presenter. I don't know if that's something on my side or your guys that needs to be sorted. Maybe if they change to gallery view, perhaps.
Gavin, I think they just wanted to see your face, and then you can put the camera off and then share the presentation.
Okay, we can do that. It's not a problem.
Thank you.
Are they able to see me?
I think you can proceed.
Thank you very much. Right. Today I've been asked to present about my South African Sign Language experience, specifically with the evolution of interpreting in the interpreting profession in higher education. For those people who have never met me or I have never met, this is what I look like. As introduced, I've worked for over 10 years within higher education institutions, mostly within KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng. This is a bit of my background. I have an undergraduate degree from the Wits University, where my majors were South African Sign Language, as well as industrial psychology. Currently, I am studying a diploma in interpreting and translation studies, also through the Wits University, which I'm hoping to complete this year. As for my professional background, fresh off the boat in 2005, 2006, I did freelance interpreting, starting off at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, as well as other freelance assignments. In 2007, I was invited to be the South African Sign Language interpreter at Fulton School for the Deaf, which is in Gillet's Durban, with Ingrid Parkin as, I suppose, my main client, and then the rest of the school as well. In 2008, I moved to the KZN Blind and Deaf Society, where I was head of their sign language department, to say, interpreting, as well as getting freelance interpreters to help the society, and then also acting as a guide and an interpreter for blind members of the society who were working there and doing tactile sign language. 2008 to 2015, I moved to the Durban University of Technology. At the end of 2015, I moved back to Gauteng. So 2016 to 2019, I was an interpreter at the Belgium campus, IT University in Pretoria. And then from 2019 to present day, I'm an interpreter at the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. Okay, so like I said, fresh off the boat in 2006, 2007, I started working as a freelance interpreter at Wits University, where I was lucky enough to be mentored by interpreters such as Thelma Kotza, Asanda Kachwa, Johnny Meyer, and Naomi Janse van Vuren, as well as others. The subjects which we interpreted for was linguistics, education, social work, and then a Bachelor of Arts degree. Our deaf clients consisted of one student who was busy with her master's level. Interpreting there, I would shadow the mentor and basically learn the craft of interpreting. Another student was a second-year student in education, where I was also shadowing there. Then we had 4 first-year students who were studying their Bachelor of Arts degrees. One of them was doing her Bachelor of Arts degree in social work, and while the others were doing their Bachelor of Arts degree in fine art. How the students were enrolled at the university, the postgraduate students and the second-year students, I was not privileged to know how they were enrolled. To my memory, the postgraduate student had studied overseas and then was allowed to continue with their postgraduate studies at the university, while the second-year student, I was unsure how she got exemption to study. The first-year students, I know they managed to get university exemption through a collaboration with one of the local high schools, where they were then put in a mainstream situation in matric to enable them to qualify for tertiary education study at Wits University. The style of interpreting, I would say, is or was a conference style of interpreting, where the students were put in a mainstream environment where they were sitting with hearing students in a class, and you had the interpreter sitting in front of the class with the deaf student interpreting for them. Vocabulary and content preparation was done by reading through course materials, which was provided, reading through books, which was on the reading list for the deaf students, interacting with the deaf students to do language development or sign development, and then, where possible, coordinating with lecturers to ensure that concepts were understood. The main challenges that the students faced in terms of Wits University was acquiring the matric exemption in order to be able to attend the university. as well as any additional resources and help which they needed. Moving on. Right, if we look at public versus private higher education institutions, like I said before, I worked at the Durban University of Technology, as well as a private institution known as the Belgium campus. Both institutions, offered courses in software engineering, which was done on a national diploma level or an NQF level 6, while the Durban University of Technology offered accounting as well. Both institutions use the acceptance criteria of points system in order to allow the students to enroll at the university. In most cases, the students would have a bit of a difficult time being allowed to study at these institutions of higher learning, and normally additional motivation would need to be given, as well as a bridging course would have to be entered in order for the students to be accepted and attend these universities. Both institutions employed their interpreters on a full-time basis, and additional resources would be provided by the universities. As my colleague Sandile expressed yesterday, at the DUT, there is an additional resource center dedicated for the deaf students to allow them to study as well as acquire additional resources. Just looking at the courses themselves, both institutions adapted their courses to allow the deaf students to study and not be overwhelmed by the amount of coursework which they would be involved with. Right. Now, some of the differences that we saw between the two institutions, where Durban University of Technology uses a more traditional way of presenting their subjects, whereby subjects are semester-based and would run concurrently, i.e. you'd have multiple subjects running at the same time. The Belgium campus ran their subjects sequentially. So you would have a subject being taught for, say, a 2-week, 4-week, 6-week, or 8-week period. And once that subject was complete, the students would move on to the next subject. This was not only for the deaf students, but for the hearing students as well. Another major difference between the public university and the private university was that the public university would have the deaf students mainstreaming with hearing students throughout the 4 years which they were at the university, while the private University of Belgium campus would have the deaf students in their own class for 2 years and then have them mainstream with hearing students within the 3rd year before moving on to their final year, which was an in-service training year where they would be employed by a company. Most of the time, that company would be the Belgium campus themselves working on in-house products. Once again, vocabulary and contact preparation was done through reading the course materials, engaging with the deaf students as well as the lecturers, and building up one's knowledge of the coursework before interpreting the coursework. Okay, at the public university, the interpreters would be available during tests and exams to translate or interpret any questions that the deaf students might have. The private university would ask their interpreters to translate into videos, tests, and question papers, which then the deaf students would have access to while they are busy writing. Okay. At both institutions, the interpreters would assist the deaf students during different processes, such as registrations and orientations, as well as during tutor sessions or any other sessions outside of the classrooms where needed. Another major difference between the public and private sector is that the students were funded by government programs in the public sector, while in the private sector, industrial sponsors would sponsor the deaf student programs. If we look at some of the challenges that I observed for the deaf students while at these higher education institutions, I would say one of the first things is culture shock. My colleagues have already spoken about this, where deaf students move from the relative protected space of deaf schools and now into a public institution which has thousands and thousands of people in it, students, staff, faculty, support staff. They do, especially for the first few months, feel that they are overwhelmed by the whole experience. Another issue that comes up sometimes is the use of interpreters, where the deaf students are used to teachers who interpret and are now put into a different system where interpreters, the interpreter role may change, and some students struggle to adapt to this change. Another big challenge, and my colleagues have spoken about this before, is understanding concepts, grasping academic reading, being able to apply the knowledge which they have learned at the tertiary education institution. A lot of deaf students struggle with maintaining the pace at which content is taught, and of course being expected to do a lot of research and reading on their own. They struggle to get out of the mindset of being quote unquote spoon-fed information and merely parroting information in order to pass the subjects which they are now studying. Another thing that deaf students sometimes struggle with is the personal life versus their academic expectations and opportunities. A number of deaf students now have the freedom to attend classes or not attend classes. They have the freedom to socialize within these universities and higher education institutions, and sometimes that does impact on their academic performance. Once graduating, I know of a number of deaf students who have struggled to find gainful employment. So although they have grasped this opportunity of studying at university and they've been successful and graduated, afterwards finding employment is sometimes difficult for them. Let's have a look at the challenges for South African Sign Language interpreters, which I have observed. Okay. The client and the employer expectations are sometimes in conflict. As interpreters, we know the code of ethics. We follow the code of ethics as best we can. But especially for those who are employed full-time at a tertiary education institution, there is sometimes this expectation that you are an employee of the institution, your loyalty is to the institution first. But our code of ethics tells us that we should not be loyal in any situation. We should be neutral. And that is something that we fight with. On the other hand, as Asanda alluded to, we are trying to gap the cultural difference between the two languages. This, in this case, being South Africa's sign language, as well as English, which is mostly taught at these institutions of higher learning. And there are situations where it becomes difficult to now draw that line of, now are you focused more on the deaf person, or you focused more on the institution? That there's a struggle that sometimes happens for interpreters to remain neutral or to bridge that gap, which they might struggle with. Another issue is working outside of the scope of being an interpreter. And this comes in with the next point as well, of being a very expensive, or seen to be a very expensive resource, where, especially within private institutions, they see, oh, well, you are here for 8 hours of a day. You're supposed to be working for 8 hours. We see that you're only interpreting for 4 hours. So for the other 4 hours, we'll find something for you to do. That sometimes becomes a big issue, because as professionals, we know the physical, mental, psychological strain that interpreting for long periods of time can have on an interpreter. And now they're expected to do additional work for the institution. That is a great challenge to overcome. And that challenge mostly comes into play where people are unaware of the role of the interpreter and the way the interpreter works and the professionalism that involves interpreting. Another challenge that we face as interpreters is class preparation and terminology development. Class preparation, where you have lecturers who are unaccustomed to working with interpreters and are either unable or unwilling to give the time to the interpreter in order to know how to work with those interpreters. That can be a big challenge. Terminology development, my colleagues have spoken about this, where certain signs are very similar. So in context, you're not knowing what sign is being used, or otherwise, when it comes to certain jargon, there is no sign for technical processes or words. There's also an issue of using correct terminology in context, especially within IT, which I interpreted. There are things that sound familiar, but within context, the sign that is generally used does not make sense. And thus, those terminologies need to be developed. And as colleagues said, working on a library of terminologies would be beneficial for everybody involved. Another issue is institutions adapting to new ideas. Often the person who sets up the program is the one who gets followed, and universities are not always open to new ideas. And then sometimes another issue can be interpreters and students become close, and students want one interpreter and not another, and a favoritism formulates. Okay, I see my time is running out, so I'll go quickly. Fatigue and boredom is another issue that interpreters may face. I've heard, or some interpreters have said, that they get bored with doing the same thing over and over again. And then, of course, a lot of institutions, because of their resources and problems, they can't employ multiple multiple interpreters. So then they will have one interpreter interpreting for long periods of time. Just to end on a positive note, let's not all be doom and gloom. I'm happy to hear that a lot of opportunities are now, or a lot more opportunities are being presented now to deaf students in order to study things that they would like. When I started, it was very limited, but now I see there's more opportunities for the deaf community to study things that they are interested in. And hopefully this picks up now and we can have more opportunities for the deaf community. The deaf community gets exposed more to people. It can prepare for the world of work. The flip side of that coin is a lot more hearing people are now being made aware of members of the deaf community, as well as the abilities that deaf people possess, and having an opportunity to interact with deaf people. The development of sign language as a language in terms of new terms and ideas is very important, and it's good that that development is taking place. And then, of course, as a sign language interpreter, because you've got students coming from different parts of South Africa, you get to learn a lot more dialects and get to interact with a lot more deaf people, which is, I feel and I believe, is a positive. Right. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. I hope this was informative, and look forward to hearing any comments or questions anybody may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gavin. We are moving to our last presentation from Mrs. Boredom. She is the sign language interpreter at the University of the Witwatersrand, previously served as the National Coordinator for Interpreting Services at DEFSA. Mpho, over to you.
Thank you so much, Londega. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm just trying to share my screen. I think I managed. I just want to put it on the slideshow. I don't know how to do it. So I'm just gonna try and figure it out. Just to check, can everybody hear me and see me?
Yes,
You are audible.
Okay, thank you so much. Today, my main focus is going to be on the impact of preparation on sign language interpreters in higher education. And I'm just going to rush through it because I see that we are running out of time. Once again, thank you for the opportunity. As Londek has already said, that previously I was working at DEFSA and I have freelanced a lot. But for working in higher education, I'm very new. So what I'm going to share here, it's my honors research that I did recently, and it has a lot of experiences that are shared among interpreters regarding preparation in higher education. The first thing that we need to ask ourselves is that why is preparation important and the impact thereof in higher education. One thing that we know that interpreters convey the meaning and understanding, and therefore we need to use an effective approach for the deaf people or for our clients. So interpreters in higher education, firstly, the setting is a very high demand occupation. You don't just come in and rock and start interpreting, because interpreters do not translate words. We need to reconstruct and restate the meaning. And interpreters, we are not experts, we are not lecturers, we are not academics. Therefore, preparation becomes very important. And another thing is that most of interpreters, we work within simultaneous interpreting, which has a very minimal time, and our lag time is very short. Therefore, interpreters need to be able to analyze a discourse and familiarize themselves within the discourse that they are working in, which preparation kicks in for that. Another important thing is that interpreters in higher education, they work under a very constrained and cognitive constraints and limiting factors. Therefore, when interpreters is prepared and they are prepared on time, it helps them, it boosts their performance as well. And it also helps them with their linguistic and extra-linguistic factors. And those extra-linguistic factors could help in terms of when you go into the lectures or into the classes, you already have a pre-existing knowledge, which will help you with your performance. It also helps you with your world knowledge as an interpreter, and you also gain new knowledge, which is required on a daily basis for sign language interpreters or for interpreters in general. Why do we need to prepare? We need to prepare because educational setting, it uses a very high density of content. And as a result, errors and omission can be experienced if we're not prepared. The familiarity of the subject matter, when you prepared, you are able to know the subject matter and you are ready to interpret in such setting. You are able to use other effective strategies when interpreting because you are ready. You can switch between free and literal interpretation depending on the preference of the deaf clients or the deaf students. You are able also to employ linguistic strategies. You are flexible on how you can interpret to make sure that the deaf students are able to give you a certain feedback that they understand. Then also when you are prepared, you are able to give deaf students access to terminology and jargons because you are aware of such jargons and terminologies. Importance of preparation, once again, is the gaining prior knowledge because written languages are problematic. And we know that in higher education, most lecturers, they've prepared their lectures, they are written, they are condensed in nature. Therefore, things like personal names, place names, numbers, figures, and all that, and the abbreviations, they need to be finger spelled, which means that it increases the lag in time to interpret, and prior knowledge becomes very helpful for you as the interpreter. And it reduces the cognitive load in interpreting because when you are prepared, it helps you to, instead of being, mentally being tired, you are able to know, you are able to predict and use other coping strategies that are available for you. Importance of preparation, it continues again, that most of the interpreters, when I was doing my honors research, they stated that when you prepared, you feel more confident. Then there's a better understanding of the content, you gain prior knowledge, better performance, and then you are able to use effective strategies. And it also portrays a better image and it builds trust because when the deaf clients or the deaf students, and even the hearing clients, I guess, because you're working between the hearing, which is the lecturers, and also the deaf students, it portrays a positive image to you as a professional. And then another important factor is that interpreters need to prepare on time. So in this case, even the stakeholders within the higher education, they need to give interpreters material on time because we have different phases of preparation. You've got advanced, whereby you are prepared on time, you are given material well on time. There's a last minute, there's also in-conference preparation, whereby within the lecture, you are preparing or you're already looking for signs within from the deaf students. So preparation on time is very important for interpreters. Challenges for interpreters in post-secondary education. Interpreters in this research, they stated that terminology gap, lack of science for specific concept, as Ingrid has already stated that concepts, we don't have science for all the concepts, which becomes a challenge. And then also another challenge that was stated, it was difficulties in getting lecture prep material such as slides and notes and etc. Interpreting complex material or content, hearing people not accommodating deaf students in group work. Those were the challenges that were stated by other interpreters. Then the possible solutions, we need to create temporary signs with the deaf students, going through the work and consult with the lecturers, maintaining a good relationship with the stakeholders. Stakeholders could be the lecture students, the admin, the disability unit as well, to make sure that you have a good relationship as an interpreter so that your work can go and flow well. making sure that you find signs before class and creating such signs with the deaf students, conduct workshop with hearing people to sensitize them on how to interact with deaf students, prepare for class and ask for clarity, search for information, gain background knowledge, and interpret meaning, not words. Solutions still continuing, explaining to lecturers the importance of prep material, because it looks like another challenge is that some interpreters in other institutions, they are not given material or they are not given it on time, which becomes a challenge. Interpreters also, it's very important that we need to take care of our mental health, and time should be allocated for preparation. As Gavin said, that sometimes the institution, they will feel like, no, we are paying you for 8 hours, but then the rest of the 4 hours, you're not doing anything. So we need to give you something else. So I think this can also be allocated there, that the other 4 hours, you are using it to prepare for the next class. Time to rest for interpreters is also crucial. Material that is normally used by interpreters to prepare, you can consult your dictionaries, browse on the internet, terminologies, and look for signs, study guides, lecture notes, and etc. that interpreters use. Then in conclusion, interpreters, when they prepare, it helps them to have language availability. When you have language availability, whether it's science, whether you have terminology for the science, or whether the English, the meaning, you are able to interpret effectively. You need to have, it helps, preparation helps you with the background knowledge, and you are able to use effective strategies that can be preferred by deaf students, or strategies that you think that can be effective in an educational setting. Preparation also helps for a better comprehension and better performance. And I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward for more other information that will help us in an educational setting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you to our presenters. I would like to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Tsolofelo Sekhatsui, to facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you so much. Over to you, Tsolofelo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Londeka. We would now move to our next section, which is the Q&A. But just before that, I just want to quickly remind you that we should indicate if you'd like to address any question by raising your hand. Wait to be prompted before unmuting your mic or turning your video when asking any question or making any comment. Now, you are welcome to raise up your hand if you have any question or if you have any comment. But again, just before that, I think we should quickly go to the Q&A section and also check the chat. On the Q&A section, we had questions from Jabbar directed to Ingrid. Jabbar was saying that, thank you for the great story that you shared with us. Then what advice can you give to our students who are studying to become a teacher for the deaf? If it happens that they do not understand SASL interpreter, or they are not happy with the interpreter, but have no choice because interpreter is already appointed at the university, what do you do regarding that? And again, how can you advise them to be honest, or if they are uncomfortable or do not understand this interpreter, but afraid to speak out because that student would not want to break the relationship between herself and the interpreter. Please advise, which advice can you give again also to work together with the university to understand this kind of situations? And then we have an answer from Ingrid saying that I'm a strong advocate of importing advanced speech-to-text technology. Other deaf people in universities over the world use this. And again, at university level, we should reduce reliance on SASL. Regarding this question, Ingrid, I don't know if you'd like to add anything or to explain more to Jabbar before we continue. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Ingrid, regarding the question? If she's not going to add anything, we'll just continue with the chat. Again, on the Q&A section, we have a question from Christopher. Hold on.
Cholofelo, sorry to interrupt. Can we, those questions have been answered. Can we see if there are any
other questions? From Jabbar to Marty again. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to know if your disability unit works with all university disability units where all have the network and same information, or what you have mentioned in your presentation. Or I want to know only if you're working with the University of Free State, because some disability units are not aware of that. And some of them, they're saying that the deaf students must pay for their own SASL. Then can you advise please on that? Thank you and keep it up. That's Jabbar. And Martin replied on the Q&A section saying that the networking happens at HEDSA level. The guideline is available on HEDSA.
Sorry, Cholofelo. Can I ask you to just go to the floor? Most of those questions have been answered already. So if you could open up your mic again and go to the floor and see if people have any questions that still might need to be answered, please. Thank you. Cholofelo, back to you.
Still looking for other questions that are not yet answered. So please bear with me. Hi all, are the students from UKZN watching this seminar? That's the question from Christopher Nair. Neville's hand is up and Gavin's hand is up as well. Neville, you can.
Hi, thanks so much, fellow. My question is directed to Ingrid. Based on the last response that given, with regard
Neville, the
to,
floor is yours.
are you
You can
able to
unmute
hear me?
yourself.
Are you able
You
to
are
hear me now?
audible. You are audible, Neville.
Thank you. So my question is directed to Ingrid on the basis of a response to preparation of students to access higher education. This is deaf students, where you mention that deaf students must develop a reliance on text or voice to text as opposed to SASL. I'm trying to, how do you reconcile that with the very emphasized focus from the deaf community on respect for South African Sign Language? I'm having a struggle to reconcile that both.
Thank you for the question, Neville. Can we have Ingrid respond to this? Ingrid?
Gavin's hand is up. You can go ahead, Gavin.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is to those who are running or participating in the various institutions of higher education. Given the budget constraints that many institutions face, and then also above that, the role of COVID, which has disrupted everything now, and also the technological advances, are those disability units and institutions of higher education looking into allowing remote interpreting to become available, to maybe expand the interpreter pool to allow for more subjects to be offered at the universities and more students to be allowed to take various courses at those universities? Maybe this is for Marty and Mpu. I don't know who else is running disability units, but perhaps we can get an answer or something that they can take forward. Thank you.
Can we have Ingrid respond first and then Marty?
Okay. Thank you, Gavin. Marty, you can go. You can continue.
Thank you. Chair, I thought I'll also respond to Neville's question. I'm not sure if Ingrid is still present, seeing that, oh, there she is. I see her now. I don't know if she wants to respond now, if she wants to Neville's question. Okay, I would just like to maybe just add, not to I'm just thinking, Neville, if from a disability unit's perspective, it will always depend on what the student needs. So if and I think coming, to totally move away from sign language interpreter services at university level, we won't be able to do. And I think it's imperative for the sign language interpreters to be present, especially with the transitioning of the student from school level to university. So, and it's during the course of the first year experience, even the second year experience, that the student becomes more aware of the academic language, become more aware of all the research that needs to get done and so forth, that they become more acquainted with the academic language, and that they would then start preferring something like voice to text software maybe. I don't think in the first year, the adaptation would be just too big, unless the student had the experience from a school level and, had the bilingual approach at the school and, fluent in English and and prefers that from the beginning. It's a different story. But I think one should, ascertain from the deaf student what the preferred method is and make the transitioning a bit easier for the deaf student before they become more independent and so forth. Then on the question of Gavin, to respond there, now I can't remember the specific question, Gavin. It was something about the disability unit's role in something. If you can just remind me, Gavin, sorry.
Sure, no problem. To sum up my question, I was trying to ascertain that with the use of remote technologies now, or better technologies now, if disabilities would be open to the idea of remote interpreting more, maybe widening the interpreting pool. For example, if say a deaf student at the University of the Free State wants to study IT, and there's an interpreter in Cape Town who can interpret for them, they could do remote interpreting or something like that to maybe just try and widen the amount of courses that deaf students may attend.
Yeah. Firstly, Gavin, depending on the university's resources, any university's resources, and how certain universities only have certain courses available for deaf students, there might be good reasoning for it. I'm not sure, but from the university where I'm at, we go from the stance that if a deaf student comes and says, I want to study sport, they must be accommodated in the sport faculty. That's it. But when it comes to, we've actually looked at remote interpreting in the past, especially regionally, because one found that, and it was before the pandemic, when at the TVET colleges, there might be a big need for sign language interpreters, and then at the university, the service is quite established, right? And then we try to sort of work together to see how we club the pool of interpreters together so that we can provide access for more students, because there were times where students would attend class without an interpreter, and to make up for the gaps of availability. So we did look into that, but and at that point, if I remember correctly, it was more about the technology behind it and how to do this, and also the cooperation of the other institution of being willing to share their pool of interpreters also becomes problematic, and how you arrange the payment of the interpreters in that regard. It's really maybe red tape within institutions, but it's definitely something that one could look into now with the more online environment and the blended approach that institutions will be following. So remote interpreting might not be a bad idea. I've actually made a note of that. It's something that one can definitely explore. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions or any comments from the participants? My network is unstable. My connection is unstable. I don't know if the interpreter is able to hear me.
We're only getting bits and pieces of your voice.
If there are no questions or any comments, then I will close out today's seminar.
Sorry about that. I think we are experiencing a few technical challenges, mainly due to the network connectivity this afternoon. I think Cholofelo was just about to close the session for the day. Thank you everyone for attending day 2 of the session. We will resume again tomorrow at 12 o'clock and hopefully bring you a short recap of day 1 and 2 to resume the session. Please join us for the final day. Poses to be an exciting and interesting panel discussion. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.